not those in the state alone, but certainly themselves, but Jews even in Kansas City, or Chicago, or New York, or Honolulu, or Singapore, or wheresoever we are proliferated in the earth. There will be a time of Jacob's trouble wherever Jacob is. And that trouble is described for us in many places in the prophets, but Isaiah 53 is a remarkably apt description of that suffering, because it bears such a remarkable correspondence to that through which Jesus himself passed. And so I have coined a phrase that will stretch your American high school mentality, junior college, if you've gone that far, and that is the mutuality of suffering. There's something about suffering that reveals, and maybe you're too young to have had occasion to notice, and maybe you never will be required, but Israel will be required. Because it's through the identification of finding themselves cast out and despised and rejected of men, and being mad more than any man, being beaten to a pulp, fleeing from violence, that in the course of that suffering, something shall break upon their consciousness, that this bears a remarkable resemblance to that one who is described in Isaiah 53, who suffered in a like way 2,000 years before us, only the difference is that he went as a lamb to his slaughter silently, while we ourselves shall howl with complaint and all the rest. But nevertheless, as I hope to show you in the text, the voice changes. It begins with a narration, then it's Israel itself speaking, then God himself interjects, and there's a recognition. Oh, it was for this reason, for our transgressions, that he bore those stripes, for our iniquity. Something about suffering in a comparable or almost identical way with the Lord and Messiah who preceded the nation reveals to the nation the meaning of the suffering which we have shunned for 2,000 years to consider. And I don't have the ability, except God would give me a special grace, to say to you that to miss the crucifixion of Jesus is to miss God, is to miss the most profound single revelation given of God in all of the manifold aspects of his deity and all of the complex statement of his triune Godhead. Because the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all expressed and involved in this remarkable debacle called the crucifixion of Christ. The one who gave himself without spot as a sacrifice, as the atonement, as the, what's that other word? The ransom. He did so by the eternal Spirit, not by human courage. And he did it so before the face of the Father, whose presence departed from him, that he would cry out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? In one historic moment of time, in a prescribed place, and called Calvary, something is transacted and takes place that is a once and for all eternal statement of God as God. Suffering for sin and placating and obviating the necessity for a righteous judgment, or else God would lose his character as God if he looks the other way and makes no issue of sin and righteousness. He's required as God to deal with it justly and righteously, but it requires ultimate sacrifice that neither man nor animal can provide, that only he himself can provide. And in providing it himself, his own nature is revealed in his humility and his love. and many other aspects. I'm trifling here. I'm just touching and playing with the surface of something that deserves the deepest examination, or we nullify ourselves as church if we ourselves have not been apprehended by the enormity of what is represented at the cross. If we trivialize that, the faith is lost. We've become only a culture of enjoyment of a kind peculiar to ourselves, but we have no value outside this building. If we trivialize the cross, if we have not apprehended its depths, we have nothing, we are nothing, we have no message. We cannot, like Paul, persuade men knowing the terror of God. We cannot begin to depict to them the enormity of sin by what was required to expiate it. Because sin will never reveal itself as sin. Its nature is to conceal itself as sin. What reveals sin as sin is the judgment that is required to expiate it. So something like the Nazi Holocaust, 6 million Jews annihilated, and 1.5 million children. What possible reason could God have allowed a devastation of that kind for which there is no other historical accompaniment than the crucifixion of Jesus himself? There are 2 Holocausts in history. One is the crucifixion of Jesus, and the other is the crucifixion of the Jew in the Nazi time. And both have to do with sin and judgment. So if we had our heads screwed on right as Jews, the question that we ought to be asking, which we have not asked, and it takes a character like myself to have the chutzpah to begin to suggest that maybe we need to consider that God was present, that it was not an historical accident, an aberration of history for which we will never have explanation and simply have to bear it. God was there, and how do you reconcile it with God of love? That he was there and present and allowed that atrocity and that genocidal annihilation to take place? How then is he a God of love? How is he a God of mercy? How is he a God of justice, a God of righteousness, that he's aware and knows and could have intervened and did not? And more than that, not only was he observant, but it was a fulfillment of his own word given in the foundational Mosaic scriptures of Deuteronomy and Leviticus now being fulfilled, which he said would befall us in the latter days. Well, to say that that's astonishment is not to find yet the right word. We were taken around Olathe yesterday. I'm wearing the pants that were provided as gift, the best I've ever owned. I hope you're impressed. But in the course of going to this very exclusive men's haberdashery, we passed equally exclusive businesses and shopping malls. Hey, don't you guys ever get tired of shopping malls? My God, they're prolific. It's hard to find a patch of grass that is not somehow attached to commerce. You guys are living in La La Land. And I'm just wondering, how can I succeed for those who are have reconciled themselves and live comfortably with the vista outside this place that is commonplace and normative in Kansas and middle-class America in general, and speak to you about the atrocity of the cross, or the meaning of the Holocaust, or the devastations that God allows. You've got to be jarred in your brain box. And if you are not, and you sit and nod amiably, I have failed. Until you have fallen out of your seat, foaming at the mouth, you have not yet understood the magnitude of either the cross or the Holocaust and the symmetry that they provide in history, that the one is the key to the understanding of the other. And for the want of that understanding, both of the crucifixion of Jesus and the suffering of Jews in the Nazi time, there's yet another Holocaust to come. Dun, 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 through which you yourself will live and be either an observer or a participant or a victim, or run with your tail between your legs away and into apostasy. So I'm wondering about you. Will you make it in that time if you have not some iron in your soul by a proper apprehension of what has already been given in history and will yet be given again in greater measure, as we say in Brooklyn, worse than it was at the first? How do you say worse, Art? Because Jesus himself said that if this time were not cut short, no flesh would survive. But for the elect's sake, this time will be cut short. For there's coming a time of trouble upon the nation, such as it has never before known, nor will again know. If he's speaking about a calamity of a Holocaust that is yet future, that is greater than anything that we have previously known as Jews, it will have to exceed the Nazi Holocaust. And if when he comes and his feet set on the Mount of Olives to save Israel from its final extremity, when all nations come against Jerusalem to destroy it, and 2/3 have already perished, and the final third passes through the fire, if that's the ratio of Jewish survival, not only in the land, but over the earth, we're talking about the decimation of 10 million Jews in a period of time shorter than the Nazi Holocaust, 3.5 years. And what are you saying, Katz? That this is a necessary and final chastisement for the nation? Yes. And that most Jews will not survive it? Yes. And that the redeemed of the Lord, who survive and return to Zion with everlasting joy in their heads, and mourning and sighing fling away, will only constitute a remnant? Yes. And that remnant will constitute the redeemed nation? Yes. And that redeemed nation allows for the return of its king in the holy hill of Zion, and becomes the accompaniment of a messianic kingdom, a theocratic rule that has its center in Zion and can only be occupied by a son of David on the throne of David, and requires a redeemed nation to be the platform, the locus of that rule? Yes. And you don't understand the word that I'm saying? Yes. I don't know why Mike Bickle brings me into these situations. That this suffering, this future chastisement, which beggars our minds as modern people who have a heart of concern and sympathy for Israel and for the Jew, that God will again allow such a devastation as will eclipse the Nazi Holocaust. Some of you will forsake the faith because of that. You'll not be able to reconcile that with what you understand of God, because your understanding is eminently too shallow. It will be an offense for you that he would allow that kind of devastation again, and yet reconcile that with God as just, righteous, merciful, and loving. Because it's in actions of that kind that the reality of God as God is most profoundly revealed. Got that? Something is revealed of God in the ultimacy of judgment that is not revealed in any other way. And when it's revealed, what we think is harsh and severe and judgment is seen also as righteous.